Welcome to the History in Focus channel. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more videos like this one.
Earthrise is a famous photograph showing the Earth appearing as if it is rising over the horizon of the Moon. It was taken by astronaut William Anders during the Apollo 8 mission. It was the first time in history that humans orbited the Moon. The Earthrise photo had an impact on global awareness of environmental protection and planetary unity. It inspired the environmental movement, leading to increased awareness of the importance of preserving our planet. A couple observing the launch of the Apollo 8 spacecraft in 1968. It was the first manned mission to orbit the Moon, a key event in the space race during the Cold War, where the United States and the Soviet Union intensely competed for technological and space achievements. The Space Shuttle Challenger exploded a few minutes after taking off from Florida. In this tragedy, all 7 astronauts on board died. That same night, President Ronald Reagan gave a speech on television. After this tragedy, experts discovered that the explosion was caused by problems related to the very cold temperature that day, which affected part of the space shuttle. To prevent this from happening again, scientists and engineers made over 100 changes to the design and operation of space shuttles to make them safer. The Challenger disaster is remembered as a very sad moment in the history of space exploration. The aircraft carrier USS Bunker Hill, a large American ship, was severely damaged on May 11, 1945, near the island of Kyushu, Japan, when it was attacked by 2 Japanese kamikaze planes in less than a minute. Kamikazes were pilots who conducted suicide missions, deliberately crashing their planes into important targets, like ships, to cause maximum damage. As a result of this action, 372 people aboard the ship died, and another 264 were injured. During the 1988 presidential election campaign, Democratic candidate Michael Dukakis visited a military equipment manufacturer where he was photographed inside a tank. The photo, showing Dukakis wearing a helmet while emerging from an M1 Abrams tank, was used by rival Republican George Bush's campaign in a television ad. The ad criticized Dukakis, suggesting that he was not suitable to be a leader on national defense issues. In October 1981, during a military parade in Cairo, Egyptian President Anwar al-Sadat was assassinated. The event was supposed to be a celebration, but took a tragic turn when military officers opened fire on the president. Anwar al-Sadat was hit and died on the spot. Several other people present at the parade were also killed. In 1979, Anwar al-Sadat made a remarkable effort for peace by signing a treaty with Israeli leader Menachem Begin. This historic agreement, known as the Camp David Accords, ended the state of war between the two countries and paved the way for a new era of diplomatic relations. A woman holding helmets she believes were used by those responsible for the killings in the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps during the Lebanon War. It is estimated that between 800 to 3,500 people lost their lives in the massacre. The direct perpetrators of this act were members of a Lebanese militia who entered the camps and executed the refugees. It was later discovered that the Israeli army had an indirect role, as they allowed the militia to enter the camps and did not prevent the ensuing atrocities. The Geneva summit between Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union, garnered worldwide attention because it was the first time in 8 years that the leaders of the 2 superpowers of the Cold War met directly to discuss. At that time, the relationship between the 2 countries was very tense, as both vied for global influence, advocating very different ideologies. The Geneva meeting, despite not resulting in revolutionary decisions or treaties, was very important. The mere fact that Reagan and Gorbachev talked face-to-face and amicably was seen as a sign that it might be possible to improve relations and reduce the risk of armed conflict. The Falklands War lasted approximately 10 weeks and began when Argentina decided to take control of the Falkland Islands in April 1982. These islands are located in the South Atlantic Ocean and had been governed by the United Kingdom for a long time. The United Kingdom, wanting to defend the islands, sent military forces to fight them. In this conflict, many people lost their lives: 655 Argentinians, 255 British, and 3 island residents. The protest in Tiananmen Square, Beijing, was highlighted on June 5, 1989, when a man stood in front of a line of military tanks trying to stop their advance. The previous day, a large number of protesters were killed or injured by Chinese troops who opened fire on them. The people protesting were mainly students who wanted changes in the government, calling for more democracy and an end to corruption. In Philadelphia in 1985, there was a major confrontation between the police and members of a group called MOVE, which advocated for civil rights and social justice. MOVE was known for having strong and radical positions and had a house where its members lived together. During the confrontation, the police threw a bag full of explosives onto the roof of the house where the group members were. This caused an explosion, and a large fire quickly started. Unfortunately, the fire completely destroyed the house and spread to other neighboring houses. As a result of this action, 11 people in the house died, 5 of whom were children. In addition to the lives lost, the fire caused the destruction of over 60 houses in the neighborhood, leaving many other people homeless. Martin Luther King Jr. photographed among a crowd during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. The demonstration gathered hundreds of thousands of people at the National Mall to protest against racial discrimination and demand civil and economic rights for African Americans. It was at this event that Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. In his speech, he articulated his vision of racial equality and justice, expressing hope and aspirations for a future where all people would be judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. The construction of the Manhattan Bridge over the East River was a milestone in the engineering and urban development of the city. This photograph, taken in March 1909, shows the final stages of construction. The work was completed the same year, and the bridge was officially inaugurated in December 1909. The Manhattan Bridge was designed to alleviate traffic on other bridges connecting Manhattan to Brooklyn. It was built using advanced techniques for the time, including the use of braided steel cables to support the bridge deck. John Lennon of the band The Beatles was killed in front of his apartment building in New York City. He was shot multiple times in the chest by Mark David Chapman, a man who claimed to be a great fan of his. John Lennon was 40 years old at the time. After his death, many people gathered in different places, especially in front of the building where he died, to honor his life and legacy. Lennon left a lasting impact on music and global culture. Reporters observing President Nixon's resignation in 1974. These reporters were instrumental in exposing the Watergate scandal, which began with the illegal break-in at the Democratic Party headquarters in 1972. The scandal triggered investigations that revealed cover-up attempts linked to the Nixon administration. Public and political pressure increased, resulting in Nixon's resignation on August 9, 1974. It was the first time a U.S. president resigned from office. Pope John Paul II in the arms of his aides after being the target of an assassination attempt. A man named Mehmet Ali Agca from Turkey shot the Pope in St. Peter's Square, Vatican City. John Paul II was hit by 2 bullets, one in the abdomen and another that struck his right arm and left hand, leaving him severely injured. After the attack, Mehmet Ali Agca was arrested and convicted, serving 19 years in prison in Italy. In a gesture of forgiveness and reconciliation, Pope John Paul II visited Agca in prison, where he personally forgave him. Years later, the Pope also helped negotiate Agca's release, demonstrating his commitment to forgiveness and mercy. A fire caused by an explosion in a generator led to a major blackout in 1981, interrupting power to important commercial and financial centers, including the New York Stock Exchange. With the power cut, The subway system also stopped working, forcing many people who were working to walk back home using the Brooklyn Bridge as a path. The blackout lasted approximately 4.5 hours, causing traffic and daily activity disruptions. The Exxon Valdez oil tanker suffered an accident in Prince William Sound. The ship struck a coral reef, spilling approximately 11 million gallons of oil that spread up to 500 miles, affecting about 1,300 miles of coastline. The oil pollution contaminated the habitat of fish, birds, and other marine animals, causing the death of many of them. The Exxon Valdez disaster is considered the second worst oil spill in U.S. history, and its consequences are still felt in the area many years after the event. A distribution of propaganda by the Ku Klux Klan occurred shortly after violent protests erupted due to the murder of Neville Johnson Jr., a 20-year-old black man who was fatally shot by Luis Alvarez, a white police officer. The tragic incident occurred in an arcade in the Overtown neighborhood of Miami. Luis Alvarez was tried for manslaughter but was acquitted. The acquittal of the police officer generated even more indignation and intensified the riots in the area. A bulletproof vest was publicly tested before spectators in 1923. During this demonstration, the effectiveness of the vest was proven, showing that it could protect against firearm shots. The event attracted a lot of attention as personal protection technology was a novelty at the time. On April 26, 1986, a series of explosions at the Chernobyl nuclear plant in Ukraine resulted in a partial meltdown of the reactor. This catastrophic accident quickly became known worldwide as one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. The initial explosions killed 32 people immediately and triggered a massive release of radiation into the environment. The radiation released by the Chernobyl disaster was 400 times more powerful than that of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Radiation exposure affected approximately 2 million people, causing a range of long-term health problems, including cancer and other severe diseases. The accident forced the evacuation of tens of thousands of people and left the city of Chernobyl and the surrounding area uninhabitable for many decades. A British farmer paints stripes on her cow. The scene takes place during World War II, when German bombings on English soil became frequent. To avoid providing visual references to Luftwaffe pilots, all city and countryside lights were turned off. These blackouts, while vital for air raid safety, created problems for motorists who needed to travel at night. To protect their animals and prevent accidents, farmers adopted the practice of painting white stripes on their cows, making them more visible in the dark. The first inauguration of Abraham Lincoln as the 16th President of the United States. A notable feature of this ceremony was the unfinished state of the Capitol Dome. The second dome, which would become one of the symbols of American democracy, was under construction, a project that lasted from 1855 to 1866. The STS-7 mission, organized by NASA, aimed to place communication satellites into orbit around the Earth. The trip took place on the Space Shuttle Challenger and lasted a week. It was the first time a space shuttle carried a crew of 5 astronauts into space. Among them was Sally Ride, the first American woman to travel to space. The astronauts completed their mission to launch satellites that would aid in global communication, which had a significant impact on the development of communication technologies and the way information is shared around the world. After the Second Papal Conclave of 1978, Karol Józef Wojtyła was elected Pope, taking the name John Paul II. This election occurred after his predecessor, Pope John Paul I, died only 33 days after assuming the papacy. John Paul II was the first non-Italian pope in over 450 years, and his papacy, which lasted 27 years, had a profound impact on the Church and the world. The Pope was notable for his international travels, his defense of human rights, and his role in the fall of communism in Eastern Europe. While the inhabitants of the town of Armero, Colombia slept, the Nevado del Ruiz volcano erupted. This catastrophe resulted in the tragic death of approximately 20,000 people. The eruption caused mud and debris flows that swept through the town, burying houses and people within minutes. Among the victims was Omaira Sanchez, a 13-year-old girl who was trapped in the rubble and mud. Rescue teams fought desperately to save her, but unfortunately, Omaira died after withstanding 60 hours in extreme conditions. Her story moved the world and brought greater attention to the tragedy. Shia terrorists hijacked Trans World Airlines, TWA, Flight 847, which was carrying 153 passengers from Athens, Greece to Rome, Italy. The hijacking evolved into a 17-day ordeal during which passengers were abused and an American was killed. The plane made 2 round trips between Lebanon and Algeria, and the situation involved complex negotiations and moments of great tension. All passengers were finally released on June 30, 1985. Pilot John L. Testrake, depicted in a famous image speaking to reporters at gunpoint, remained calm throughout the incident and is widely regarded as a hero for his conduct. At the time, it seemed almost unimaginable that the Dow Jones Industrial Average could drop 500 points in a single trading day. Yet, that is exactly what happened on October 19, 1987, a day that would become known as Black Monday. The market began to fall as soon as the opening bell rang on the New York Stock Exchange, and as panic spread among investors, losses accelerated until the closing bell. The drop was the largest since 1914, with the Dow Jones losing 22% of its value in a single day. The impact was felt in financial markets around the world, causing a crisis of confidence among investors and leading to a series of trading system reforms to prevent something similar from happening again. Dr. Wernher von Braun was one of the most important aerospace engineers of the 20th century. Born in Germany, he was a central figure in the development of the V-2 rockets used by the Nazis. After the war, von Braun and many of his colleagues were brought to the United States as part of Operation Paperclip, a program aimed at recruiting German scientists to work for the American government. On American soil, von Braun led the team that developed the Saturn V rocket for NASA's Apollo program. The F-1 rocket engines, seen in the photograph, were the most powerful liquid-fueled rocket engines ever built and were used in the first stage of the Saturn V. Each of these engines had a thrust of 1.5 million pounds, making it possible to launch the Apollo spacecraft toward the moon. In the city of Manila, Philippines, a frightening plane accident involving a China Airlines jet occurred in 1980. During landing, the aircraft ran off the runway and caught fire. Despite the great danger, a flight attendant named Wang Wenhuang showed extreme courage. Even with the plane on fire, she decided to stay on the aircraft to help evacuate trapped passengers. Wang Wenhuang bravely worked to ensure that several people exited safely before she herself jumped out and escaped the fire. Mount Rushmore shows the carved faces of 4 U.S. presidents: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln. The project, started in 1927, was designed by an artist named Gutzon Borglum. Originally, Gutzon planned to create not only the presidents' heads, but also parts of their bodies and hands. This would have made the sculptures even larger and more impressive. However, Gutzon Borglum passed away in 1941, and his son, Lincoln Borglum, took over the project. Unfortunately, due to lack of funds, the monument had to be finished in the same year and was never completed according to the original plan. In early 1986, the Philippines experienced a movement known as People Power. Thousands of citizens took to the streets to express their dissatisfaction with Ferdinand Marcos's government. The dictator had been ruling the country for over 2 decades, and many Filipinos believed that Marcos was not governing fairly and that his regime was marked by corruption and abuse of power. The 1986 elections, seen as fraudulent, further increased public discontent and fueled protests, leading to Ferdinand Marcos's resignation and eventual fleeing of the country. In 1989, in the city of Bucharest, Romanian citizens staged a large protest against the government in Republican Square, marking the beginning of a revolution that would lead to the fall of the communist regime. The country's leader for 24 years, Nicolae Ceausescu, faced growing popular dissatisfaction due to his authoritarian governance and harsh living conditions. The protest in Republican Square quickly turned into a mass movement that culminated the next day in the overthrow of Ceausescu. Just 3 days after being deposed, Nicolae Ceausescu and his wife Elena were tried and executed. The execution was televised in Romania, marking a dramatic end to the communist regime in the country. The Apollo 13 space mission aimed to take 3 American astronauts to the moon. However, just 2 days after starting the journey, there was a major failure in the spacecraft. One of the oxygen tanks exploded, causing serious problems for the electrical system and the crew's lives. This forced the astronauts to cancel the trip to the moon and focus on returning to Earth. Due to the problem, they had to take a longer and riskier route back and landed in the Pacific Ocean near Samoa. The photo of Sharbat Gula became very famous after being published on the cover of National Geographic magazine in June 1985. Sharbat was 12 years old at the time of the photo and was an orphan from an area called Pashtun, located between Afghanistan and Pakistan. She was living in a refugee camp due to conflicts in her country that forced many people to leave their homes and seek safety in Pakistan. Erno Rubik, an architecture professor in Hungary, created a puzzle that would become known worldwide as the Magic Cube in the 1970s. The puzzle was developed as a tool to help students better understand the concepts of space and design. In 1980, the toy was renamed the Rubik's Cube in honor of its inventor and gained international popularity. The new nomenclature helped solidify the brand and made Erno Rubik the famous name associated with the toy. Many years after the Titanic sank, a team of explorers from the United States and France managed to locate the ship's wreckage at a depth of over 12,000 feet in the Atlantic Ocean. The discovery was made on September 1, 1985, using special equipment designed to explore deep, dark waters. The team used a remote submersible called Argo, equipped with cameras, to explore the ocean floor. In addition to locating the ship, the team also recovered many personal items and artifacts that were on board the Titanic, providing a more detailed view of the lives of the people who were on the ship. Ethiopia faced a severe drought. For a long period, there was almost no rain in Ethiopian lands, causing crops not to grow and consequently people not having enough food to eat. Starting in 1983, this lack of rain led to a situation of widespread famine affecting millions of people. In the Wollo district of Ethiopia, many people who no longer had food became refugees within their own country and began to rely on aid from the government and organizations from other countries to survive. In food distribution centers prepared by the government, long lines of people waited to receive the necessary food to continue living. Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, photographed during a congressional hearing on the Iran-Contra scandal. At the time, individuals connected to the government conducted a secret operation in which they sold weapons to Iran despite an embargo prohibiting such sales. The money obtained from the sale of these weapons was then diverted to support a rebel group known as the Contras in Nicaragua. The Contras were fighting against the Sandinista government of Nicaragua, which had communist leanings. When these secret operations were discovered and made public in 1986, there was enormous controversy and numerous investigations. Oliver North, who worked on the National Security Council and was instrumental in organizing the secret operation, defended his actions, claiming he was acting out of love for his country and trying to combat communist influence in Central America. Pan Am Flight 103 was traveling from London to New York. During the flight, the aircraft exploded in the sky over the town of Lockerbie, Scotland. This terrible explosion was caused by a bomb that had been hidden inside a suitcase. The investigation found that individuals from Libya were responsible for planting the bomb. Unfortunately, all 259 people on the plane died. Additionally, 11 people in Lockerbie who were at the crash site also lost their lives. The image shows the Eiffel Tower during its construction phase in July 1888. In the record, only the base and some parts of the first sections are assembled, with cranes visible assisting in the construction process. Construction began in 1887 and was completed in 2 years, using predominantly wrought iron, which was an innovation at the time. This structure was initially criticized by some of France's leading artists, who considered it an abomination. But over time, it became one of Paris's most recognized symbols. During the Winter Olympics held in Lake Placid, New York, the United States hockey team, which was composed mainly of college players and amateurs, played against the Soviet Union team. The Soviet Union was considered the best team in the world at the time and the favorite to win. Surprisingly, the American team won the game. This result was so unexpected and impressive that it became known as the Miracle on Ice. Geraldine Ferraro became the first woman to be chosen as a vice presidential candidate. From the Democratic Party, she ran alongside Walter Mondale, who was running for president. No woman had gone this far in a national election in the United States. When speaking about her candidacy, Geraldine Ferraro made it clear that this represented a significant step for all women, showing that they could achieve high political positions. Although she and Walter Mondale did not win the election, her campaign had a great impact, showing that women can and should have leadership roles at all levels. Sandra Day O'Connor became the first woman to serve as a justice on the United States Supreme Court. Sandra's appointment was a milestone because before her, only men had held positions on the High Court. Her presence brought a new perspective and paved the way for more women in positions of power in the judiciary. Sandra Day O'Connor felt a great responsibility in being the first woman in this role and strived to act exemplary, ensuring opportunities for other women in the future. Her success helped promote gender equality and inspired many other women to pursue careers in law and other fields that were dominated by men. The King of Rock, Elvis Presley, died tragically in 1977. His death occurred in his mansion called Graceland in Memphis. Elvis began his career in the mid-1950s and quickly became famous for his unique voice and energetic performance style. Throughout his career, Elvis released many songs that are still much loved today. His impact on music was so great that he influenced many other musicians around the world and changed the way people viewed rock and roll. During her re-election campaign, Margaret Thatcher, then Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, presented her party's manifesto, the Conservative Party. This document contained several important proposals aimed at addressing the country's economic and social challenges. Among the main proposals were significant changes in taxes related to unions, aiming to reduce union power and promote greater economic efficiency. Another proposal was the promise to find ways to reduce the number of unemployed people. Thatcher emphasized the importance of creating a favorable environment for economic growth and job creation, recognizing that reducing unemployment was fundamental to improving the lives of British citizens. In the 1980s, the Statue of Liberty turned 100 years old. The celebrations were not only to commemorate the statue's arrival date, but also to remember 100 years of continuous friendship between France and the United States. On April 4, 1975, Bill Gates and Paul Allen founded Microsoft in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The company began as a small project to develop software for the Altair 8800, one of the first personal computers. Over time, Microsoft grew exponentially, becoming one of the most influential and valuable corporations in the world. Microsoft's success is widely attributed to the vision and hard work of its founders. The company pioneered several areas of technology, including operating systems with the release of MS-DOS and later Windows. Victims being assisted by emergency teams after the terrible massacre at the post office in Edmond, Oklahoma. Postal worker Patrick Sherrill, dissatisfied with his job and facing possible termination, entered the post office armed and opened fire on his co-workers. The attack resulted in the death of 14 employees and injured 6 others before Sherrill took his own life. This tragedy drew attention to mental health issues in the workplace and led to a review of safety and wellness policies in the U.S. Postal Service. A knocker-up performing his duty in London in 1929. Carrying a long stick, the knocker-up's job was to knock on doors and windows until ensuring that clients were awake. This job was essential before the popularization of alarm clocks. Before the explosion of Mount St. Helens, a magnitude 5.1 earthquake occurred, triggering an explosion so intense that more than 1,300 feet of the volcano's summit was blasted into the air. The eruption created a massive crater about 1.2 miles wide where the summit once was. The force of the eruption was tremendous, sending millions of tons of volcanic ash into the air. This ash spread across various areas in nearby states, causing disruptions and damage. Astronaut Neil Armstrong, along with Buzz Aldrin, landed the lunar module Eagle from the Apollo 11 mission in the Sea of Tranquility on the Moon. Neil Armstrong was the first person in history to walk on the satellite surface, followed by Buzz Aldrin. This event was broadcast live on television to millions of people around the world. Armstrong declared the famous phrase, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." In May 1923, Vladimir Lenin, leader of the Russian Revolution and founder of the Soviet Union, was photographed alongside his sister, Anna Ilyinichna Yelizarova Ulyanova, and his doctor, A.M. Kozhevnikov. This image is considered the last photograph of Lenin before his death. At the time, Lenin was already seriously ill, having suffered several strokes that affected his health and ability to lead. Leonid Brezhnev was an important leader in the Soviet Union, ruling the country for 18 years. He was part of the older and more conservative group of leaders in the Communist Party. Brezhnev died in 1982, and his death marked the end of an era of conservative leadership. After Brezhnev's death, the new leaders who took power wished to implement changes and reforms, opening up possibilities for the modernization and updating of the Soviet Union. Halley's Comet passes near our planet every 76 years. It was named after the astronomer Edmund Halley, who was the first person to predict when the comet would be seen again. In 1986, Halley's Comet became visible to the naked eye from Earth. Although it was not one of the best years to see it, as the comet was relatively distant, it was still a rare and exciting opportunity, as the next return of the comet will only occur in 2061. Located on a small river island in central Pennsylvania, the 3 Mile Island Nuclear Power Plant was the site of a partial nuclear meltdown on March 28, 1979. This incident occurred in the plant's No. 2 reactor when a series of mechanical failures and human errors resulted in the reactor core overheating, leading to a partial meltdown. Although it did not result in immediate deaths, the event generated significant public concern about the safety of nuclear plants and the potential risks of a nuclear disaster. The release of small amounts of radiation into the environment further increased fear and distrust of nuclear energy. During the Victory Tour, Michael Jackson drew a lot of attention by wearing a white glove on one of his hands. This was not an ordinary glove. It was created by designer Ted Shell and was adorned with 50 small lights that shone, adding a special touch to his performances. The white glove became one of the most iconic elements of Michael Jackson's style, complementing his unique and innovative image. In 2010, the glove was sold for $190,000 at an auction. Marie Curie and Pierre Curie shortly after their wedding in 1895. The couple was in France, a country at the height of the Belle Époque, an era characterized by great scientific and cultural advances. Marie, of Polish origin, became the first woman to win a Nobel Prize and the only one to win it in two different scientific categories, physics and chemistry. Pierre, a French physicist, was a co-recipient of the Nobel Prize in Physics with Marie for their work on radiation. More than 187,000 coal mine workers decided to stop working in the United Kingdom from 1984 to 1985. They were protesting against the government's decision to close several coal mines. The miners and their unions believed that closing the mines would cause many people to lose their jobs and harm their communities. The strike is known as one of the longest labor disputes of the 20th century and had a significant impact on the United Kingdom. The end of the strike did not bring the desired outcome for the miners. The mines were eventually closed, leading to job losses. The wedding of Prince Charles to Lady Diana Spencer took place at St. Paul's Cathedral in London, England, on July 29, 1981. About 750 million people around the world watched the ceremony on television, making it one of the most watched television events of the time. Many workers, including Lech Walesa, stopped working at the Gdansk shipyard in Poland. The strike was organized to demand better working conditions and rights for workers. Lech Walesa emerged as a central figure in this strike, leading the workers in their demands for change. The strikes lasted several weeks and resulted in a significant agreement with the government. The workers won the right to strike and to create independent unions to protect their interests. This historic agreement, known as the Gdansk Agreement, was signed in August 1980. In 1985, a group of 45 famous musicians, including big names like Michael Jackson, Diana Ross, and Bob Dylan, came together to record a song called "We Are the World." The initiative aimed to raise money to help people in Africa facing a severe famine crisis. The song was written by Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie and was a global hit, selling over 20 million copies and raising a significant amount of money. One of the only two existing photos of the U.S. Supreme Court in session was taken by photographer Eric Salomon in 1932 during the Hughes Court. Salomon pretended to have a broken arm and hid a camera in his cast, managing to take the photo discreetly. The presence of cameras in the courtroom while the Supreme Court is in session is illegal. In the photo, Chief Justice Charles Evans Hughes is at the center, presiding over the session. Epcot Center, Disney's second theme park in Florida, opened its doors to the public on October 1, 1982. This innovative park stood out for its futuristic vision and its educational and entertaining attractions. Among all the attractions, the most iconic is perhaps Spaceship Earth, a massive spherical ride that has become a symbol of the park. In 1981, IBM launched its first personal computer, called the IBM 5150, in the United States. This new computer was designed to be used by one person at home or work, representing a revolution in personal computing. The IBM 5150 was smaller and more affordable than previous computers, becoming a practical tool for daily use. Consumers could buy the IBM 5150 in stores like Computerland and Sears, with a starting price of $1,565. The computer came with a basic configuration, but could be expanded with more memory, disk drives, and other peripherals, allowing greater flexibility and customization for users. Louise Joy Brown, born on July 25, 1978, in the United Kingdom, was the first person in the world to be born using a technique called in vitro fertilization. This method allows an egg to be fertilized by sperm outside the body in a laboratory, and then the formed embryo is placed back into the mother's uterus. This innovation created new opportunities for couples who had difficulties having children. Since Louise's birth, over 6.5 million children have been born using this technology. David Roeder celebrating his release after spending 444 days as a hostage. In November 1979, a group of Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 52 Americans hostage. The crisis began when the students demanded the extradition of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who was in the United States for medical treatment. The situation turned into a long and tense diplomatic crisis. President Ronald Reagan was shot while leaving the Washington Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C. Associated Press photographer Ron Edmonds captured the moment of the attack in a photo that later won the Pulitzer Prize. Reagan was leaving the hotel after giving a speech when John W. Hinckley Jr. fired several shots, hitting Reagan on the left side of his chest. The president underwent emergency surgery and fully recovered from the injury. John W. Hinckley Jr. was later found not guilty by reason of insanity and was committed to a psychiatric institution. The talking clock was a telephone service through which people called to know the exact time, and the individual had the responsibility of informing callers of the correct time throughout the day. At the time, this was an essential function, especially before the popularization of synchronized radios and standard time services as we know them today. A performance directed by dancer Pina Bausch, in which women appear to defy gravity with their faces turned toward the wall. This scene is part of Bausch's signature dance theater style, which combines elements of dance and theater to explore deep emotions and social issues. This image captures a historic moment in medicine during the Old West period, depicting Dr. Sayer, a renowned orthopedic surgeon, in his office in the late 19th century. Dr. Sayer is seen applying a pioneering technique he developed for the treatment of scoliosis. He is examining the curvature of a patient's spine with the help of an innovative device he created that involved the use of a metal brace, designed to gradually correct the curvature of the spine, demonstrating a significant advancement in orthopedic treatments of the time. In late 19th century China, especially in the 1890s, criminals were often confined in special devices like these as part of the justice system of the time. One such device was the cangu, a heavy wooden structure used to restrict the prisoner's movement, which trapped them by the neck and sometimes also by the wrists. The kang was a form of public humiliation and a way to prevent escape, often used in busy places to expose criminals to society.